Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. You know, there is nothing, and I mean nothing, more fun about this job than finding a great new piece of music that I could tell you about. And boy, have I got a discovery for you. It's by Hungarian composer László Lajtha. Here it is on Budapest Music Center's own label. And the works, well, I'll tell you about the works in a minute. First, let's talk about the composer. Who the heck was Laszlo Laita? Well, he lived from 1892 to 1963. This was a major guy. I'm not kidding. I'm talking like Bartók Kodai major guy. I'm talking more important than Dohnányi, more important than Leo Weiner. I mean, until you get to like the really modern Hungarians, he was really an extraordinary figure in Hungarian musical life. Why do we know nothing about him? Well, the reason is because principally he fell afoul of the government. Really, from his earliest life, he was something of a nonconformist. And in 1956, he supported the Hungarian uprising against the communists, and of course that uprising didn't go too well, and neither did Laita's career after that. His music was pretty relentlessly suppressed, and so even those of you who may have collected, the Hungarian music that we got on Hungariton in like the 60s and 70s, and some of those fabulous LPs managed to make their way here. There was very little music by Laszlo Laita. There was some chamber music. There were two symphonies that János Ferencsik managed to do, the fourth and the ninth, but he wrote fabulous music. Stylistically, he was a combination of sort of Hungarian music and French influence. And in fact, he had many friends in France. And his principal publisher anyway, was Le Duc in Paris. And, the titles of a lot of his pieces are in French. He was heavily a Francophile type composer, which I think is fascinating, wonderfully interesting, because, most of these guys in Hungary were Germanophiles, if anything. And to have somebody who was that imbued with French culture and French aesthetics and, the breadth of French music, that same sort of sense of instrumental color, of craftsmanship, of style, of elegance. That's what Laita was like. He wrote 9 symphonies, nine symphonies, and a heck of a lot of other music, a lot of chamber music in various formats, 10 string quartets, a pile of orchestral pieces besides the symphonies, and they are marvelous. Some of you may know that all of the symphonies and a lot of the other orchestral works have been recorded by Naxos. They were originally on Marco Polo, but now they're on Naxos. And I'm going to be talking about those because they are extremely beautiful and important pieces. They're absolutely unique in terms of sonority. I have his scores because Leduc has published them in miniature scores, some of them anyway, and it's fascinating to look at the way he writes for orchestra. Of course, being French, there's a lot of sort of luscious sounds, rich string timbres, harp, celesta, but he also often includes parts for up to 9 percussionists in his symphonies. But with a footnote, in all of his scores, he says, the fact that I use a lot of percussion and some brass doesn't mean that I want a crude sound. Everything has to be clean and in proportion. And, he goes on like that. You get a sense of exactly what he's after. But this disc, the one that I'm going to tell you about, is absolutely astonishing. It was one of the great discoveries of the past couple of years, and it is an unnumbered symphony. Here it is, an unnumbered symphony called Les Soli, the solos, and it's for string orchestra, harp, and percussion. And, the obvious resemblance is to Bartók's music for strings, percussion, and celesta. And it's an apt comparison, but Laita's style is completely different. totally different. The Bartok is kind of spooky and expressionistic. Laita is never that. Laita is primarily melodic, although sometimes quite dissonant, obviously modern sounding. His sense of sonority is completely different. His refinement in terms of his use of string instruments, and strings seem to have been his specialty, given the 10-string quartets, and he wrote string trios, he wrote all these other pieces for strings. And on this disc also, you get his 2 Sinfoniettas for strings, which are also extremely beautiful, rewarding pieces. This is the kind of music that any chamber orchestra worth its salt should be drooling, dripping saliva to play, because it would be a hit with the audience, and it's gorgeous. And I got permission from the Budapest Music Center to be able to play you a couple of excerpts so you will know exactly what I mean. That's what's so wonderful about this. The performances, by the way, feature the Budapest Chamber Orchestra under 3 different conductors, one for each work. The symphony, Le Soli, is conducted by Simone Fontanelli, and the first Sinfonietta for strings is Imre Rochman, and the second Sinfonietta for strings is Peter Saba. And they are wonderful performances, beautifully played, beautifully recorded. And, the reason that the symphony is called Le Soli, the solos, as in Lessoli, Le Soli, is because each movement features a different member of the string section and a solo role, from the double basses on up to the violins at the end. The whole piece is it's just a joy to listen to. I turned a couple of my friends onto this, and they were very, very happy that I did, especially if you happen to do string playing friends, because, his writing for string instruments is extremely virtuosic and so sensitive to issues of timbre and texture. It's marvelous. So let me play you the opening of Le Soli, the symphony by László Lajtha for string orchestra, percussion, and harp, or harp and percussion, including timpani, by the way, which you'll hear right away. Just the opening of the first movement. Take a listen to the first minute or so. It's stupendous. Doesn't it make you want more? That's a find, isn't it? It really, really is a find. And the Sinfoniettas are just as beautiful. The Sinfoniettas for strings, the second has a particularly beautiful central slow movement. It turns lyrical and passionate and very Hungarian. You can tell that this is Hungarian music, but it's not obviously folky, and it's not obviously, it doesn't sound really like Bartok or anyone like that either, but there is a certain improvisatory quality to the string writing and a passionate intensity to the climaxes, however beautifully shaped and crafted they are, that really marks the music out as Hungarian. The music has that there's a certain songfulness and soulfulness and intensity, especially to Hungarian writing for string instruments, that's instantly identifiable. But I want to play you just the soft opening of this slow movement. It's exquisite. It's so beautiful. Have a listen to this. That's the slow movement of the second Sinfonietta for strings. I think that, as we proceed and do these talks, I'm going to be talking about Laita quite a bit. He really was a major voice, major voice. And what happened to him, was really, really tragic in terms of his work being suppressed. I mean, it was all published, it was all available, but he was so roundly suppressed by the government, the communist government in Hungary, number one, and then he lacked an advocate in the West who was really promoting his stuff, which would have allowed it to be recorded or allowed it to be performed live. I've never seen a live performance of any one of his major orchestral works, which I think is a crime. It's absolutely a crime. I mean, some of the symphonies are fabulous works, beautifully written and just enchanting to listen to. I mean, so fascinating in terms of texture and sonority and tuneful and enjoyable. And there's just nothing not to love. And I'm really looking forward to talking about him more. In the meantime, if you're going to make a start, though, with Laita, I would recommend this disc from Budapest Music Center. I really would, because it just, first of all, it not only sort of contains his essence, but the piece itself is so extraordinary. It really is. It's one of those one-of-a-kind masterworks, it's totally imaginative. It marks him out as a composer of genius, a musician with an individual voice and the capability to take that voice and render it in effective sound. It's just tremendous stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed this little sample. I hope you can find this disc. It's available. The Budapest Music Center people are nice guys. They deserve some support. And so does this disc, so does Laita. You really owe it to yourself to start to listen to his music. You're going to be in for a treat, I guarantee. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.